Part 1. The Arrival. The first sign was the silence. As Claire Emerson drove down the winding, narrow road into Ashwood, she noticed the world grow quieter with every mile. The towering pine trees thickened, forming a dark tunnel overhead, blotting out the afternoon sun. Her car tires crunched gravel, the only sound apart from the steady thud of her own heart. Ashwood wasn't on most maps. She had only found it mentioned in an obscure local legend site, a footnote among tales of ghost towns and unsolved mysteries. But the story intrigued her, an entire group of campers vanishing without a trace in 1971, the survivors refusing to speak, and a lake that locals warned children to never go near. Perfect material for her next article. Claire's GPS had given up 20 minutes ago, so she followed the directions handwritten by a librarian she had bribed in the nearest town. Turn left at the fallen oak. If you reach the rusted sign, you've gone too far. When she finally reached the town's edge, she half expected it to be deserted, but Ashwood still clung to life. Barely. A handful of wooden houses leaned against the encroaching forest. A general store with peeling paint, a boarded-up diner, a gas station with a single ancient pump, a church whose bell tower was cracked and leaning, and looming beyond it all, Ashwood Lake, a dark sheet of glass stretching into the mist. Claire pulled up in front of the only inn, a sagging building called the Hollow Pines. The porch creaked under her boots as she walked inside. An old woman behind the counter looked up from her knitting, her eyes sharp despite her frail frame. "You're not from around here," she said, not a question. Claire smiled politely. "Just visiting. Research, actually." The woman's knitting needles paused midair. "You won't find much here worth writing down. I'm looking into the lake, the disappearances." A long silence, then almost inaudibly, "Best if you don't." Claire's smile faltered, but she didn't argue. She just signed the battered guest book with a flourish and accepted the heavy iron room key. Room 3. "Stay away from the water after sundown," the woman said as Claire turned to leave. "And if you hear anything, don't listen." Part 2. Echoes in the Mist. The room at Hollow Pines Inn smelled faintly of old cedar and something else. Something damp and earthy, like wet leaves rotting underfoot. Claire set down her backpack, clicked on the solitary bedside lamp, and glanced around. The wallpaper was faded with age, curling slightly at the edges. A single painting hung crooked above the bed, a depiction of Ashwood Lake, shrouded in mist, with vague shadowy figures along the shoreline. She frowned. Were those people? Claire stepped closer. The figures were blurred, not detailed enough to be certain whether they were human or not. Their shapes melted into the fog like they were part of it. A chill rippled through her. She shook it off. Just old art. A coincidence. Outside, the town seemed abandoned after sunset. Claire walked the empty streets, her boots echoing sharply against cracked pavement. Streetlights buzzed weakly, casting pools of dim yellow light that barely pushed back the growing dark. She made her way to the general store. A single bell jingled overhead as she pushed the door open. Inside, the place smelled of dust and canned goods. An elderly man behind the counter, wearing suspenders and a skeptical expression, watched her approach. Claire smiled, trying to look harmless. "Hi, I was wondering if you could tell me about Ashwood Lake." The man's mouth tightened into a thin line. He shook his head. "No stories here, just water and bad memories." Claire pressed. Anything you can tell me about the disappearances in the 70s? He hesitated, glanced around the empty store like someone might overhear. Finally, he said, "Talk to Eli Turner. He's the only one who's still breathing, who knows anything worth telling." "Where can I find him?" The man scribbled an address on a crumpled receipt. "Cabin on Hollow Bend Road. Don't go after dark." Claire tucked the paper into her pocket, thanked him, and left. The bell above the door jingling once, then falling silent. The mist was heavier now, curling down the streets like living fingers. The lake loomed just beyond the tree line, its surface black and glassy under the weak light of a waxing moon. Claire paused at the edge of the trees, staring out over the water. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw someone standing at the shoreline, a figure pale and unmoving. But when she blinked, it was gone. Back in her room, Claire reviewed her notes, trying to ignore the heaviness pressing against the window panes. Wind howled through the trees. The inn groaned and settled on its old beams. Sometime past midnight, she woke abruptly. Someone was whispering. She sat up, heart hammering. The whispering grew louder. Unintelligible words, hissing syllables, slipping through the cracks of the window and door. She strained to make out the words, but they seemed to shift and slip away, just beyond comprehension. Claire forced herself to stand. She padded to the window and pulled aside the curtain. Nothing but mist and shadows.
Part 3. The Survivor's Warning. The sun was a weak, pale disk rising through the mist when Claire packed her bag and headed toward Hollow Bend Road. The address the old man at the general store had given her was scrawled on the back of a receipt, barely legible now after a night of her nervously folding and unfolding it. The road itself was barely more than a dirt track, winding deep into the forest behind town. Branches clawed at the sides of her car as she drove. Birds were conspicuously absent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. After nearly half an hour of bouncing along rutted paths, she saw it. A small cabin, crouched low against the backdrop of skeletal trees. The place looked abandoned. Claire hesitated, but then gathered her courage and stepped out of the car. Gravel crunched under her boots as she made her way to the front door. She knocked once, twice. Silence. Then, just as she was about to turn away, the door creaked open a fraction, revealing a gaunt face peering out at her. Eli Turner. He looked exactly like the rumors described. Sunken cheeks, yellowed eyes, a lifetime of fear etched into every line of his skin. "What do you want?" he rasped. Claire swallowed. "I need to know about the lake." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he opened the door wider and gestured for her to come in. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood smoke and damp earth. The windows were covered with heavy black curtains. Strange talismans, bundles of twine and feathers hung in the corners. Eli motioned her to sit in a battered armchair while he sank into one opposite her. "You're the reporter," he said. It wasn't a question. Claire nodded. Eli exhaled a slow, shaky breath. "You shouldn't have come. I need to understand what happened. Why the others disappeared. Why the lake." He cut her off with a sharp gesture. "It's not the lake." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's what's under it." Claire leaned forward. "Tell me." Eli stared at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. "There's something buried beneath Ashwood, older than the town, older than anything you can imagine. We were fools, thought we could camp by the water, drink and laugh and shout. We woke it up." Claire's mouth went dry. "What is it?" He shook his head. "It doesn't have a name. It doesn't need one. It's hunger, memory, rage." He looked up at her, eyes wild. "When it calls you, when you hear the whispers, it's already too late." Claire thought of the figure by the lake, the voice outside her door. "What happened to the others?" she asked, her voice barely audible. everything you touched. Forget this place. Never say its name again. Claire sat frozen, the words sinking into her bones. Outside, the mist pressed against the windows like a living thing. When she finally stood to leave, Eli grasped her wrist, surprisingly strong. "One last thing," he said. "If you hear them calling your name, run. No matter what you see, no matter who it sounds like, run." Claire nodded, her heart hammering. As she stepped back into the cold morning mist, she realized something. Eli had never asked her name. Yet when the door shut behind her, she heard a faint voice from inside the cabin. Not Eli's voice, a woman's voice, soft and familiar. "Stay. Please. Stay." Claire didn't look back. She ran,